Welcome, everybody, to this panel on Ukraine in the crosshairs of the superpowers. My name's Howie Hawkins. I'm with the Ukraine Solidarity Network, which is sponsoring this panel together with Haymarket Books, and I'll be chairing this panel. The Ukraine Solidarity Network works to build moral, political, and material support for the people of Ukraine in their resistance to Russia's criminal invasion and in support of their struggle for an independent, egalitarian, and democratic nation. We support trade unions and progressive organizations in Ukraine and link them up with their counterparts in the United States. Last year, we raised money for generators for the independent miners and railway workers unions to distribute to people suffering from cold and darkness in the face of Russia's bombardment of Ukraine's power plants and grid. And this year, we're raising money for blood analyzers for the independent nurses union called Be Like We Are. And there should be a link coming up in the chat to which you can link and make a contribution to the nurses in Ukraine. Or you can just go to the Ukraine Solidarity Network, and the website's easy to remember. It's www.ukrainesolidaritynetwork.us. Ukraine Solidarity Network is one word. And just go to the link that says donate to support Ukrainian nurses. Okay, on to our panel, Ukraine in the crosshairs of the superpowers. And that seems to be where we are now after the August 15th Trump-Putin summit in Alaska, where they talked about how to partition Ukraine's land and people without any Ukrainians at the table. And Trump and Putin discussed business proposals, especially renewing US participation in Russia's oil and gas extraction and pipeline businesses, as much as they did on their so-called peace proposal about how much of Ukraine's land and people Russia should get. And then today, just to make it interesting, the mercurial Trump threw us a curveball after speaking with President Zelensky at the UN General Assembly today. He issued a Truth Social missive saying that the Russian military is a paper tiger and Ukraine can win back all of its land. He's never said anything like that before. So, as one Ukrainian wag quipped, maybe Zelensky installed a new Trump software update during their meeting. In any case, we have a lot to talk about, and we have three great speakers to address the regional and global ramifications of Russia's war and occupation, Trump's accommodations to it, and ways we can solidarize with the Ukrainian resistance. Each of our speakers will go for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have the rest of the time, 45 minutes, for them to respond to your questions and comments that you can put in the chat. So I'll introduce all the speakers, and then we'll go right into it. Our first speaker will be Tanya Vyhovsky. Tanya is a state senator in Vermont, a member of Vermont's Progressive Party and the Democratic Socialists of America, and she recently returned from a trip to Ukraine. Our second speaker will be Ilya Budraitskis. Ilia is a Russian socialist and anti-war activist who was based in Moscow until Russia's all-out war in Ukraine began in February 2022. And he's the author of a book published in 2022 called Dissidents Among Dissidents, Ideology, Politics, and the Left in Post-Soviet Russia. And then our third speaker will be Dennis Bondar. Dennis is a native of Ukraine. He's a professor of physics at Tulane University and a member of the Ukraine Solidarity Network. Okay, Tanya, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thanks, Howie. It's nice to be here. I wish, we were not still talking about the challenges in Ukraine and to the Ukrainian people. As you said, I did just return from a trip to Ukraine. And one of the things I think that is often lost in so much of this conversation is the agency of Ukrainians and the ability for and absolute necessity for Ukraine to be able to chart their own path and have agency and autonomy. While I was in Ukraine, I met with people from all kinds of different networks, whether it was people in socialist NGOs or the trade unions, whether they be the federated trade unions or the independent trade unions. I met with students. I met with people working to build more political power that is outside of the sort of traditional neoliberal structures. And what I heard, and I met with soldiers, I met with regular everyday people who volunteer their time to make sure that people at the front have the food they need, the camo tarps that they need. And what I was really struck by was a few things. One, the unity and maturity of the leftist movement in some ways that I don't even see here in the United States, and perhaps that's a byproduct of the full scale invasion, that people come together more. And I certainly heard that, some when I was talking to the feminists and the students in Lviv, just how they see that the places that are under attack the most, there's the most unity, because there's an outside enemy, so there's not as much time to fight internally. Was sort of the takeaway from that. But I was also really struck by the spirit, the absolute will to go forward with a Ukraine that works for the people. In spite of nearly 4 years of constant bombardment, constant attack, none of the people that I spoke to were in a space where they were ready to give up, in a space where they were ready to accept occupation, partition, or anything but a just path forward. And truly, the only just path forward is returning all Ukrainian land to Ukraine. And to me and many of the people that I spoke to while I was in Ukraine, that includes Crimea. One of the things I think is often lost in the conversation in the United States is there is this conversation about the war starting in 2022, but it didn't start in 2022. Crimea was invaded and has been occupied since 2014. And I also spoke to people who fled Crimea because of the horrific conditions under Russian occupation. And there was, of course, differing opinions there on various different, what is the best path to reconstruct this, or how do we respond to climate change, or how do we build more social justice for our LGBTQ community. Different issues came up, and people had differing thoughts, differing feelings about some of those things. But the really space that I saw just nearly complete unity was in the need for Ukraine to decide what happens to Ukraine. And this very visceral sense that Ukrainians understood and wanted Western leftists to understand is that there is no leftist movement in Ukraine if it is occupied by Russia. And there currently is a small but lively, connected, and thriving movement for a left Ukraine, a social Ukraine, a democratic Ukraine, a Ukraine that values human rights, and that will be wiped off the map if they are occupied. And so that was a message I was asked again and again and again to bring back to Western leftists. And what I also heard really overwhelmingly is that, yes, people are tired, but they're not giving up. And this didn't matter who I spoke to. And it didn't matter if I was speaking to soldiers at the front who want better conditions for the soldiers, who want a more defined contract. They certainly didn't come in saying, oh, everything's perfect, because of course it's not. This is a nation that has been invaded, a nation that is stuck between Western imperialism and Eastern imperialism. And one of the frustrating things for me over the past, nearly 4 years, and really even longer than that, but the conversation has been much more front and center for the past 4 years, has been this idea that because the US has at times supported Ukraine, then it must be bad. And really all this is to me is a flip side of American exceptionalism. We've got people in this country that have been fed a diet of American exceptionalist propaganda where they believe that everything the US does is good. We're the best country in the world. And of course, we know that's not true. But the opposite side of that is people that believe that anything the US gets involved in must be bad. And therefore, if the US is supporting Ukraine, then Russia must be the good guy. And we obviously know that that is also not true. Imperialism is imperialism, whether it's the United States and Britain doing it or whether it is Russia doing it. And what they're doing is clearly imperialism and colonialism. Putin has been quite clear that his goal is to wipe Ukraine off the map. That is not an acceptable way forward. That isn't, and that's not lasting and just peace. And so being able to go and have my feet on the ground and experience what is happening every day and what people are living through, while also speaking to the people who would agree that the current Ukrainian government is not what they want forever. They don't want neoliberal corporate politics that mirror what is happening in the United States, which we know is also terrible. We know that movement here in the United States has led us to this place we are now. And so there are people working really hard for a different future. And we've also seen at least twice in just the last couple of months, Ukrainian people taking to the streets to push back against policies their government is putting forward, in spite of the fact that they are under martial law, and organizing like that is illegal. And in both instances, they won those fights. Just a few days before I landed in Ukraine, they were pushing back against the policies coming from the central parliament that would have rolled back independence for the anti-corruption organizations. And while the people I was speaking to felt a bit torn, on the one hand, what I heard is, yes, it's great that that wasn't rolled back, and we should actually be moving forward, not backwards, or not even staying with the status quo. We should be strengthening those organizations. And so, what I saw was a group of people who are willing to push back against bad policy right now and willing to plan for a future where they can push back more. And that future has to be without Russian drones and Russian missiles killing children and hitting schools and residential buildings, and without any Ukrainian land occupied by Russian forces. And it was interesting to see the statement today. It certainly was not what I was expecting and was not what I've heard come out of Trump's mouth previously, that Ukraine can win. And that's certainly what I felt on the ground there is a strong belief in Ukraine that they can win and that they will win. And so, the flip side of that, too, of course, is the Western imperialism. I'm under no illusion that the United States has supported Ukraine for altruistic reasons. We know that Donald Trump wants rare earth minerals. We know that, administrations have seen Ukraine as their way to sort of keep an eye on what's happening in Russia, much like they have used Israel to keep their eye on what's happening in the Middle East. Like, I am under no illusion that the sort of metered out support that the US has historically provided to keep this ongoing while Harvard Vanguard and the BlackRock Group buy up cheap Ukrainian land. There's absolutely awful capitalist things that this war is being used to move forward. And we have to push back against that as well. But that does not mean we don't supply everything necessary for Ukraine to end this war now. And I think it's also, over the past couple of weeks, as Russia has escalated and has invaded Romanian airspace and Polish airspace and Estonian airspace, really critical that we recognize that the fight for a free, sovereign Ukraine is a fight for global democracy. It's a fight that says imperialism is never acceptable. Imperialism is never what we sit back and say, okay, well, actually, that's fine because this imperialist is bad. And so I think it's really critically important that we have a discussion that centers Ukrainians, that centers the people on the ground doing the work, that centers the fact that just because one imperialist power says, hey, we're going to support this right now, doesn't mean that another imperialist power is not wrong. And that centers the long history of Russia trying to wipe Ukraine and Ukrainians off the map, that recognizes the genocide of the Holodomor, that recognizes the way the Bolsheviks came in and destroyed what was one of the first, if not the first, truly democratic socialist republics in the world. I think it's been frustrating for me, someone who grew up in a Ukrainian American household, who grew up connected to my Ukrainian heritage and my family's Ukrainian culture, to suddenly find myself arguing with people who 5 years ago probably couldn't have placed Ukraine on a map about Ukrainian history and Ukrainian sovereignty. And I think that we have to be able to open up those conversations and have real conversations that center the voices of the people that are living it, experiencing it, and fighting for a better future for themselves. It honestly feels a little strange that I'm the first one talking here and not Dennis, who is from Ukraine. And I guess I believe I'm the person who was most recently in Ukraine, so perhaps that is why. And I think it's important too to just recognize what people are experiencing. The time frame that I was there started out as a quieter in terms of daily air raids and missile strikes, and a few people even told me that it was sort of suspiciously quiet. I think I went the first 3 days I was in Kyiv without a single air raid alert. Well, there was one during the day one time, but at that time there hadn't been a daytime airstrike in over a year. But then as the Putin summit got closer, the air raid alerts got more and more frequent, and there was one evening that I did spend in a bomb shelter, and within about 25 minutes even though the air raid sirens were still going off, I was told that the missile was hitting a ways away from where I was, and I could go back. And the next morning when I got up and the person who was picking me up came to see how I slept, I was like, oh, I didn't sleep very well. The air raid sirens were going off. And what I got back was, oh, I must have slept through it, because it's such a constant that you just have to learn how to live your life. You have to learn how to just continue going on, even though the sky is actually falling. And I was struck by that resilience and the care and the number of people who asked me what was happening in the United States and how they could help us. The number of people who were shocked at how bad things are in the United States, particularly for workers' rights. It was a really wonderful sharing of information and sharing of experiences from, a leftist here in the United States to all of the people who took time out of their days to travel across the country with me, to spend time with me, to show me what was happening and take me to places where people were doing all of this incredibly important work, to also just sitting back and watching daily life tick on. Well, yes, bombs might fall from the sky. When I was in Kryvyi Rih and I was taken down into what is now being used as a school, it's an underground bomb shelter, but the air raids are so frequent that it makes more sense to just teach there than it does to run people up and down the stairs every day. And just learning about how people are innovating and challenge and just continuing. And I think that we in the United States and on the left here have a lot to learn as well about how we too can innovate and create global solidarity with any people who are under attack. I think I'm going to I know I have a couple more minutes, but I think that seems like a good place to end it and turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you, Tanya. Ilya Budraitskis is our next speaker.
Thank you, Howe, and thank you for this opportunity to to speak. So now it's already a few months after beginning of so-called peace process announced by Trump and supported by Putin, which was during all these months is followed by the most terrible and destructive bombardments of Ukrainian cities by Russian army. And this peace process is probably the worst example of devaluation of even the very idea what the peace process is about. But this imitation of peace process is really needed both for Putin and for Trump. So for Trump, of course, it's very important to present himself as the kind of third side, as the mediator, as the peacemaker, as the person who is in between, like Russia, Ukraine, Europe, who is not taking sides. And in order to do so, he definitely need to keep this channel of personal communication with Putin. So it's very important for him to keep this opportunity to meet with Putin in person, like what happened in Alaska some time ago, or keep talking with him by telephone, or send his envoy to Moscow time to time, because that is what proves his role as the mediator. That also give him opportunity to bring the responsibility for this ongoing war to the others. And that's exactly what we heard today from his speech in United Nations, where basically he said that, well, it's India and China who is still buying Russian oil. There is Europe who is still economically cooperated with Russia. And it's not me who is responsible for this war is still going on. So I think that is the reason why, despite of everything that he is saying, he's not ready to impose any real like sanctions against Russia, because that will immediately close for him this opportunity to continue this useless talks with Putin, and it will move him to, let's say, side of pro-Ukrainian coalition that he is trying to avoid, and that is quite clear. And of course, Putin is also like benefits from all this fake peace negotiations, peace process a lot. Firstly, because it's definitely a great opportunity for him to show that, well, there is no any international isolation of Russia. Look, I'm meeting with Trump. I'm meeting with Chinese or Indian leaders. And the ongoing war became a reason why Putin became so important person to speak for very different international leaders. So that's the first reason why Putin is interested to continue this fake peace process. And another is because it's important message for internal Russian audience, because of course on one side you can say that this war was already kind of normalized in the Russian society. There are no any significant anti-war protests. People not even talking about the war too much because they afraid, and also because they some kind of psychologically normalize of this war during these 4 years. But at the same time, you definitely can say that the fatigue of this war is growing in the Russian society. And if you look inside Russia, you can see well, on one side, you have like this ongoing, extremely militarist, aggressive, anti-Ukrainian propaganda. This idea that we will fight to the end, we will conquer Ukraine, is existential for Russia to flourish as the empire, to restore our glory, our sovereignty, true sovereignty as a country. But at the same time, I think it's very important for Putin to send this kind of signals to the Russian society that, well, look, there are some peace negotiations. And I personally, I'm for peace. That the others who are not ready for peace. There are others who are warmongers. There are Zelensky, who is interested to prolong this war. There are European leaders who are interested to continue this war against Russia using Ukraine as a tool. And I'm ready for a peace deal in every moment. And I think it's also important element of this very controversial but very smart and very well orchestrated internal propaganda in Russia. But of course, as I said, a fatigue of this war is growing. So it was recently reported by Russian opposition media that more than 300,000 Russian soldiers died, and probably the real numbers are much more, maybe 2 times more. There are more than 50,000 Russian soldiers who deserted from the front line during this 4 years of war, and that is very significant numbers. And probably some of you remember that in the beginning of this Russian invasion, especially after the first year of the Russian invasion, there were a lot of talks about some miracle of Russian military Keynesianism, that Russian economy is growing. So now it is clear that this effect was very short-lived. Now you have increase of inflation. Now you have the decline of the real wages in the country. So now Russian society more and more facing with the economic and social consequences of this of this war. Of course, we don't need to be very kind of wishful thinking about it. So, of course, Russia is not on the eve of some social revolution, of some uprising led by anti-war sentiment, but it's very important to take into account that the current social economic situation in Russia became more and more affected by this ongoing war. And the last thing to say is probably that despite any further development with this so-called peace process, Russian regime, as it is for now, in the form of militarist, oppressive dictatorship, couldn't be delinked from the very strategy of aggressive policy abroad. And we saw these last provocations on the border with Poland, provocations against Estonia, against Romania. Today, something happened even in Denmark, and Tanya already mentioned it in her talk. And I think that for Putin, so all these provocations, they are important not only as the way to make pressure on Europe to stop military aid for Ukraine, to stop political support of Ukraine, but also as a sort of testing the real red lines of NATO defense, because Russia definitely has some appetites in Eastern Europe, and that could be, if Putin will achieve his goals in Ukraine, that could be other possible directions of Russian military interference. So for a current moment, we can say that Putin is successful. Like he's successful because pro-Ukrainian coalition is splitted, because even inside the Europe, the question of support of Ukraine is kind of very unclear. The Russian offensive, which caused a lot of lives, but it's still it's still on its way. But strategically, strategically, it's not success for sure. It's not success for Russia as a state. It's not success, of course, for Russia as the as a society, as the country, and it's clear that Putin couldn't defeat Ukraine only by military means. So his war against Ukraine, it's a complex war which include also like political, ideological like dimensions, and that's the reason why from our side we must keep talking about what is going on in Ukraine. We must support Ukraine, like politically, in humanitarian way, in any possible ways, because what is happening is not only question of Ukraine, but the question of how our world will look like in the coming years.
All right, thank you, Ilya. And our next speaker is Dennis Bondar.
Thank you. So I would like to begin by thanking both Tanya, the first speaker, and our moderator Harvey for visiting Ukraine this year. And these visits are very important for activists and progressive activists back there. They show that in the West we care about Ukrainians. We care about what kind of Ukraine is being fought for, and these visits are is direct peer-to-peer solidarity. It's as direct as one can get. Of course, the second best is to contribute to humanitarian initiatives. So, for example, as the one that we are running, a Ukraine Solidarity Network, and you can find the link to the GoFundMe page there. So in August, Gallup polls published statistics which said that 70% of Ukrainians would like to see a negotiated end to the war as soon as possible. And this number has been gone through the media in the West, saying, "Oh, Ukrainians are tired, etc., etc. They're going to give up." But this cannot be further from the truth. The very same poll found that basically the same 70% also believe that the war will not even end next year. So, yes, the Ukrainian society is extremely tired. There is a huge war fatigue, yet they know there is no other option. There's no other option because, as any Ukrainians will tell you, they just need to tell you two names: Bucha, the massacre in Bucha, which took place in the first few months of occupation of the full-scale invasion, and occupation of Kherson, and of course, there's many other occupied towns and villages where huge atrocities took place. So there is no other choice. There's just no other choice but to fight. And fatigue or not fatigue, Ukrainians are fighting. The level of anxiety. Tatiana described her daily reality through her experience there, but one can only amplify this to be every day for nearly almost 4 years. This is a huge toll on the mental health and anxiety levels. Of course, there's no reliable statistics, but as a proxy data, one can imagine the following information: that a very popular pop drink in Ukraine is right now being sold with a valerian root being added. Valerian root is not something very tasty, but it has this known medicinal effect of calming and reducing anxiety. So this tells you how this kind of material manifestation of the mental health impact of the war. So despite these difficulties, civil society in general and progressive circles in particular keep discussing about the future of Ukraine, what kind of Ukraine is being fought over, and everybody's actively participating in street politics. So, for example, there were recently this month, the Parliament of Ukraine tried to pass bills to strengthen criminal responsibility for military personnel, and it caused a mass protest actually, and the bill was withdrawn. Early in August, Tatiana alluded to, there was a protest, there was a mass uprising against the abolishment of anti-corruption in independent anti-corruption institutions. Again, this caused a lot of protests across the country, not just in the capital. And I would like to also mention that even that all the mass protests are, according to Ukrainian laws, are strictly forbidden. They're illegal because you have a martial law in place. Mass gathering is forbidden, and yet, despite that, the street politics is very active, including events like a pride parade in the capital, etc. Because this identity, the Ukrainian identity of protest, which of course was the foundation of the Maidan revolution back in 2014, is absolutely essential, right? Zelensky, no government can, despite the constitution, and actually, besides the legal right to do so, can actually suppress this desire to express, to have public expression. And this is very admirable because, as I said, again, it's in principle, it's a criminal offense. Even more admirable is that progressive circles in Ukraine find energy to express solidarity with the people of Palestine. There were two protests in support of Palestinian people, one taking place in August, and recently, in a very recent last week, early this month. And these protests take place in front of the National Museum of the Holodomor. Holodomor is a Ukrainian word which literally means genocide by famine. And it was a Stalin man-made famine in 32-33, which killed about 6 million Ukrainians. It was a very traumatic event to the national consciousness. And this is, by the way, how the east of Ukraine became Russian-speaking, one of the reasons. And there is a clear parallel between the suffering of Palestinian people, the famine that takes place there, and these horrible famine that took place in 30s. And again, this is something to be admired, that people find the moral strength and moral consistency to see the parallels between their struggles. Now, it's in August, a very important figure in Ukrainian progressive circles was killed in action. I'm talking about David Chichkan. He is a painter, an anarchist, and he joined the army in 2024 and was, as I said, killed in action early August. This August. So David is an example of anarchists and other progressive people who are actually don't use the pen and paper to argue against Russian imperialism, but actually take arms and sacrifice and pay ultimate price for fighting for the freedom. And for him, the Russian army exemplified modern fascism. And it's unfortunately, it's still a point that is very difficult to comprehend for much of the global left. Chekan actually has been subject of attack from conservative right-wingers in Ukraine. Even in 2024, his exhibition depicting portraits of Ukrainian soldiers was actually canceled, believe it or not, because of his political anarchist views. And of course, his death, his funeral, was itself a very significant public event in the central square of the capital, Maidan Square, where of course, Maidan Revolution took place. And it itself saw a bit of a clash between conservative, and far-right elements and progressive elements. And but of course, the conservative and far-rights were a minority. So Chikan is among 221 writers, artists, and scholars and other cultural figures who have been killed whether it's in Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure or by serving in the army. So this tells you that this is a tremendous, not only huge loss in life, land, infrastructure, ecological devastation, but also significant, in fact, kind of national consciousness in a way, in national cultural development. Another amazing example of how people in Ukraine think about the future is even there was an invitation, there was a talk given by a journalist who lived through the occupation of Sarajevo during the Yugoslavs war, and she talked about the relationship between how it was to live in Sarajevo and basically Serbs, and basically how you reconcile how what happens after the war, how you're as Bosnian, how do you reconcile what Serbians did to you? And this was of course very, very controversial topic because the war in Ukraine is still going on. But it just tells you that the way even the topics which are extremely sensitive are not, are actually could be publicly discussed. Ukrainians, unfortunately, are not only under threat from Russian army in Ukraine, but also, unfortunately, Ukrainian refugees are physically threatened in Western Europe and in the United States. As many of us know, the horrible murder of Irina Zarutska that took place in Charlotte, North Carolina, has been recently utilized for a very racist agenda. And Irina's murder is one in the string of murders which never actually got to the media attention, the same media attention. Most of the murders take place in Europe, because that's where the majority of Ukrainian refugees. And usually these murders are of like women and children, because that's the majority of Ukrainian refugee population in the West is. So this racialized the murder of Irina actually caused a lot of outcry in the United States, right, when Fox News weaponized it, and Donald Trump and many activists on the right, some of them even calling for Irina to become an equivalent of George Floyd, for the sort of White Lives Matters movement analog. And of course, we should condemn this utilization of this strategy in this racist in racial agenda. And this event coincided with the publication in Ukrainian of this book, The Voices of Black Lives Matter. It's actually written in Ukrainian by Ukrainian writer or painter and writer Oksana Bruchovetsky. It's a really beautiful illustrated book. I just wanted to show you that how it's extremely highly, it's a great work of publishing, high quality publishing. And this is published in Ukraine at the time of the existential war. And this just tells you that it's this actually, it tells you that the discussion of where the society should go and solidarity is still there. It's still alive. So there is still resources to do this work. It's amazing. And of course, far-right activists use the presentation, presentation of this book, in order to sort of equate, somehow to say that this is led or in any way connected to Irina's murder. Was actually this weaponized and led to some events, cancellation of some events for this book. And PEN Ukraine published a statement condemning such attack on a Ukrainian writer and a Ukrainian publisher. And I would like to quote a section of the statement, because this statement condensify of the debates that Tatiana mentioned, the maturity of the debates that takes place in a Ukrainian civil society at large, not just progressive circles. So the quote is, "A book about human rights, particularly of Black Americans, is needed by Ukrainians not even to better understand modern America and to count on US support. It is primarily needed for ourselves, for developing empathy and solidarity with oppressed social groups in the world. Not to receive something, but to give our support and solidarity. We can care about the world only if others in the world also care about us. In the us versus enemy paradigm that Ukrainians found themselves due to the Russian invasion, it is very important not to confuse crime with any kind of differences. It is exceptionally valuable to preserve what is a reliable mechanism of defense and resilience, critically necessary for Ukraine's survival as a state and nation, humanity." So on this silver lining, I would like to end my conversation and to thank everybody for supporting Ukraine and Ukrainian people. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you, Dennis. So I don't have the chat that people are putting on YouTube, but I'm told they will, your questions and comments for the speakers to comment on will be coming. And while I'm waiting for that, I'd like to ask the speakers what they thought of. I thought Ilya made a really good point. You know, this statement by Trump saying the Russian military is a paper tiger and Ukraine can take its land back, but Trump isn't taking responsibility. He's blaming India, China, Europe, and he just says, "I'll sell arms if they'll buy them to NATO, and they can pass them on if they want." And I thought that was a good way of putting Trump's remark today in context. So I wonder, you know, what everybody thought about that.
I mean, I think it's a really important point, and it continues to highlight how the United States, particularly under this administration, but really generally, is looking to capitalize on this conflict. I do think, though, what really struck me. So, one, I think neither Putin nor Trump actually want peace, and if they claim to, they have no real commitment to it. But it was such a stark shift in rhetoric from Trump, from what I've heard ever, that really struck me. That no, there is no commitment to helping in any way, but the shift is such a polar opposite in rhetoric that, I mean, I was shocked by the statement today.
Dennis, do you have anything to say on that, or Ilya, you want to elaborate on it? I do have a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll get to those in a second.
I'm actually, I think this statement should be put in the context of the speech that he gave to the United Nations. I'm curious whether this will be, the speech in the United Nations will be will be analog of Khrushchev's speech that he gave back in 60s. And it's, I mean, you know, in Ukraine, nobody's buying, there's no value to these words. Like, people just want action. People want weapons delivery. People want to see concrete things. It's just such a total distrust to the international institutions and as well as the Western politicians that nobody's surprised by any rhetoric. Like, it's a surprise, but it's just a surprise. There's no expectation of anything.
Okay, I
Yes,
got 6 questions, and why don't I ask the first 3 of them, and then you all can respond, and then we can go to the next 3. So the first question is, how should we be thinking about NATO's role in the war at this point? And do you see any changes to its role in the near future? Second question, can the speakers say more about why Russia has been so reluctant to agree to any kind of settlement? Is it calling the West bluff or something else? And the third question is, can you step back and help me understand what Russia was aiming to accomplish with this war in the first place. Is it really just about land? So, anybody want to jump up first?
Mm, yeah, I can. I
Okay,
can
Ilya.
try. Uh, yeah. Well, for years, the left were talking about NATO as the main imperialist force, like in the world, and that was very true. But now that's a moment when the very integrity of NATO is unclear, is under the question. So, for example, it became clear that NATO, even with all this enlargement in Eastern Europe, is not able to defend the borders of its Eastern European members. This enlargement was more political step than real military step. And now Putin is testing the integrity of NATO in the military sense. Yeah, so I think it's a moment when we should rethink NATO not as the a bunch of U.S. Puppets leading by U.S. imperialism, but as the complexity of various interests and various agencies. And for example, the reason why Poland or Baltic states wanted to join NATO should be also clear for people on the left. They joined NATO not because just they're dependent on United States in political or economic sense, but also because it's a question of their like security is the only that can guarantee them a security, and now this put under question. So that's why dialogue between between the left in the various countries, especially between the left in core imperialist countries like United States or Western European countries, and the left in the countries like Ukraine or like Poland or like Estonia is so much needed. And I don't know who is the author of this question, but I highly recommend him to talk to any of the left, of his comrades from these countries, to understand the complexity of NATO role in our days.
Who wants to go next? Dennis, Tanya?
Okay, maybe I will say. So it's I agree with what Ilya said. Just to elaborate that, in 2022, before the full-scale invasion, right? Nobody believed in Ukrainians being able to resist Russian imperial adventure, and even Ukrainians themselves, did not quite believe what they actually accomplished. And one should not underestimate. One should not neglect the Baltic states and Poland, in basically with their willingness to defend themselves, right? NATO or not. The challenges to the role of NATO is actually, you should take a look at what Mr. Orban is doing. Despite his extremely pro-Putin rhetoric, right? He's not thinking about leaving NATO. So, because today you're a friend of the Tsar, and who knows, maybe tomorrow you may be the next subject of next. But to be a bit more serious, I think by behaving in such a cruel way, Russian military, in a way, not only by literally wiping out city after city, villages after villages, they send a message. They every day they demonstrate to all the NATO members that they made the right choice. yes, NATO is in crisis because of a lack of support of the United States, and but I would not discount this organization should the push come to the shove. Of course, nobody should want that, but anyway, the war is not taking place on NATO's territory. The hot war, of course, hybrid war is, but hot war is not.
I think the only thing I would add, and I feel like a lot of those questions are probably better answered because a lot of them are sort of about Russia's intent, and certainly there's been the publicly stated intent, but I imagine Ilya may have a little bit more inside information about, what's happening in Russia. But the only thing I would add is that, in the most recent times, nothing has driven countries joining NATO more than Russian imperialism. They are looking at what's happening, saying, well, we don't want that. And so the complexity of NATO and where it sits now, I think, are big questions to unpack. But I think it's really critically important that we recognize, 2023, when Finland joins. Finland has an experience with Russian imperialism, and then you have Sweden joining. These are countries that historically had expressed no real interest. And so I think we have to, again, not in the US or Western left, focus all of our attention simply on Western imperialism, but we have to look at that with the complexity of Eastern imperialism. And when I think about, what is the long game here, it's so that these dictator oligarchs can divide up the world and have their little kingdoms. And Putin, I believe, sees himself in that space of wanting to have his kingdom and divide up those assets. And the assets we're talking about are sovereign nations, they're people. And I don't think Putin has been particularly unclear about his plans for this war, and it is to eliminate Ukraine as a sovereign nation.
Okay, let's take another round of questions. I got 5 in there, and why don't I take two and then go that way? Because the next 2 they're different, but everybody might have something to say. The first is, I heard an argument that sounded pretty convincing that the main reason Trump decided to reverse course on the US's Ukraine policy under Biden is that it was one of the first things that was used to justify his impeachment, Hunter Biden's alleged business dealings there. Is there anything to that? And the second question is, on a different vein, early on, there seemed to be some heroic efforts among Russian leftists to oppose the war, but that seems to have disappeared. Ilya spoke about the fear among the populace, but I'm hoping he can speak more about that. How much is repression contributing to the silence? So why don't we get everybody on the first one, and the second one's directed to Ilya.
I think it's certainly true that that Zelensky and Trump personally did not get along, and this, Trump being such a unique politician, where he puts such a heavy weight on a personal relationship with other leaders, is definitely affecting his policy decision, if one can think that there is a policy narrative here. Sometimes I fail to see any grand narrative, but let's assume it exists. We are immortal, not able to comprehend that. So I think there is definitely element to this. I don't think it's unfortunate that the president of Ukraine is just not, he personally doesn't get along well with Trump, and of course Zelensky doesn't suffer from it personally, right? It's millions of Ukrainians suffer by not getting interceptors, not getting Patriots, not able to sleep, etc. So this is it is true, and the only thing that I think is that it's very clear is one has to understand that the Zelensky stubbornness that may appear to be stubbornness is actually. It's not a stubbornness, it's a reflection of a popular demand in Ukraine. He cannot, the same way, as I mentioned, he he has a legal right to ban the mass gatherings, but he will not do it because that is very destabilizing. And by the way, that also goes against the narrative that he's a dictator, right? He definitely, he definitely does not exercise his power in that way. But he cannot just make any deals. Like, there is just no way, because not as Zelensky, no Ukrainian politician can make deals which surrender the swath of territories of Ukraine and recognize the surrender. Because this may even lead to, of course, we don't have a reliable data, but this is, in military, you could envision a mutiny situation where, some fraction of military will actually resist the government if Zelensky goes to such a, concessions. So this is the case where personalities matter a lot, more than maybe we would like to admit. But personalities are definitely limited, and as Karl Marx said, right, individuals make history, but not of their choosing.
I think I would add the other piece of this is, yes, personalities, and Trump is incredibly vindictive. We've seen him be incredibly vindictive towards people he's never even met because they wronged him in some way. And the other aspect of this, people may recall from the first term that Trump came under a huge amount of scrutiny because he made an attempt to extort Zelensky. So I think that, there's a couple, and Zelensky resisted that and was like, no, we're not going to do governmental extortion. So I think there, in addition to the personality clashes, there are a couple of things that actually happened where Trump was really shown to be in the wrong and really came under scrutiny by the American people as well as sort of globally. And I think early on in this administration as well, when the now very infamous meeting between Trump and Zelensky and Vance and Rubio happened, American people really rose up and were like, wait a minute, that's not diplomacy. That's not how we treat other world leaders. And I think in so many ways, Trump is not able to navigate in a way that isn't grounded simply in vindictiveness and grounded simply in, well, you wronged me in some way, and so I'm going to punish you. And to Dennis's point, though, he's not punishing Zelensky. He's punishing everyday Ukrainian people.
Okay, Ilya.
Yes, so of course it's a big question about the real condition of the Russian society, because the first thing you have to understand that Russia is now it's nearly a totalitarian state with the massive surveillance, with the fear of any wrong opinion about not just about war but about the government politics, like in general. Yes, so for example, Denis talked about this recent protests in Ukraine about corruption and about Zelensky and so on, that happened during the war in the country, which is highly affected by the war. So Russia definitely is not a country which is affected by this war on that scale as Ukraine, but you can't imagine even 1% of this scale of protests that happened in Ukraine this year. So it's impossible to imagine that in any Russian city, some people will freely and without fear of immediate violence and persecution will, put their demands against government, criticize Russian government, especially war or internal politics. So definitely any public dissent is not possible And it became clear since a few weeks after the start of the full-scale invasion, when all organized public protests were brutally smashed by the Russian police. For now, you have thousands of people who are political prisoners. Some of them are leftists, like socialists, anarchists. Many of them are not leftists, like liberals, or just people who have a strong anti-war stance without any clear political affiliation. And recently, British socialist Simon Pirani completed a really great project. I'm putting a link here. Just a moment. So this is a collection of speeches of the Russian anti-war political prisoners in courts. And this book, which was published by British like left-wing publishing house Resistance Book, is a collection of these direct speeches. And I highly recommend this book for anyone who is really seeking to understand the condition of the Russian society and the program, the ideas behind this very brave anti-war resistance. Yeah, so I mean, of course, I can say much more about this, but probably I will stop here.
Okay, let me put the next two questions out there and get responses. First one is, totally agree about the need for the war to end, for there to be space for the left in Ukraine to grow. But what should we expect in the immediate aftermath to look like? Who will be funding the rebuilding if the war ends tomorrow? So that's one question. The other, has Trump's open effort to grab Ukraine's material resources led to much of its public to lose illusions of the role of the USA?
I'm happy to share what people shared with me when discussing these things while I was there. You know, I think that there's, from the folks that I was speaking to, there is no illusion that what happens after a lot of wars couldn't happen in Ukraine, where there is, you know, people capitalizing on the destruction. And what I was really struck by, both when I was in Ukraine last month, as well as when I was in Belgium and in March with the European Network for Solidarity with Ukraine, is that there is an acknowledgement of this possibility there and a plan to fight for something different. I don't think it's going to be any easier to fight for a non-corporate capitalist future post-war than it is here where we're not at war. But what I did hear was deep discussion, and what I did see was laid out plans for what it could look like and how it could be different. But is it going to be a struggle? Of course it's going to be a struggle. The struggle for a government and economic system that centers everyday working people is universal. We're all struggling for that. And what again struck me was how many different people who were connected over different sectors, whether it was climate, whether it was the feminist movement, whether it was reproductive justice, we're all connected in talking about what it could look like. Whereas I so often, you know, grapple with here, we've got no clear path from where we are to where we want to be and how we could get there. And that's not what I experienced. I experienced real tangible plans for how to build forward, but I don't know what it would look like tomorrow. But what I do know is that there was a strong core group of people ready with plans to fight for something different than what we've seen happen in so many places post-war. In terms of the response I heard from people with, Trump's very real grabs at the mineral resources, people were angry about this, yes. And what I heard from a lot of people is a real sense of, like it or not, the US is the largest military in the history of the world, has the largest economy. And there was a real sense that they need the US's help. I am not entirely sure with the resiliency that I've seen and how much, I don't know that that's necessarily true, especially in the state that the United States is in right now, where we're tearing ourselves apart internally. But I think it's incredibly complex. The United States has been viewed as this major military power and sort of the kingmaker for so long, and that Western propaganda goes everywhere. And so I found myself talking to a lot of people, as I said, really dispelling some of the myths that have been spread around the world around what it looks like in the United States and what's happening in the United States, and really trying to make clear that at this point in time, the United States is an unreliable ally. And really, I don't know that that's simply at this point in time. I think that has been throughout history, the United States allies with people that it's advantageous for them to ally with. And thus, you'll always be an unreliable ally, because when it's no longer advantageous, you leave. But there was still a strong sense amongst a lot of people, the sort of larger population of people that I talk to, that US help is necessary. Again, I don't know that I agree with that.
So if I may add that, one of them, of course, as a result of any war, there's a huge the national debt of Ukraine is huge and keep increasing because of the expenditure. And we here in the Ukraine Solidarity Network US have argued for cancellation of Ukrainian debt. So that would be a first major step, because the debt payments are actually crippling. For example, I think soon the interest rate and debt payments, which both interest rate plus the scheduled payments, might actually match the military expenditure of Ukraine. So this is a huge burden on the country fighting the existential war. So, and the debt is being held by the most vulture funds that we all know about. So it's not that there is this myth that it's somehow it's working class people in Europe and in US are paying for it. It's absolutely not true. There's no way that these debt payments will benefit anyone, any working people anywhere in the world. It only benefits as very, very wealthy individual oligarchs, Western oligarchs. Now one has to also recognize that the Western payment system is being used by Ukrainian oligarchs, trying to shelter their fortunes, and corrupt politicians were trying to siphon, looted money. And this hypocrisy also needs to be confronted. And and believe me, it's a resource. It's a significant resource. And finally, Europe holds a significant part of, I think, $300 billion of Russian foreign reserve fund. And even today, I believe President of France said that he's against using this money, touching this funding for rebuilding and for funding Ukraine war effort. And again, this is a total hypocrisy. This is all these are examples of this class conspiracy, right? Because all the cost of the war, not only the financial cost will lie mainly, or I would say exclusively, on the worker peoples of Ukraine. And the more we can decrease the debt, the more we can eliminate profiteering, just plain profiteering. We're not talking about like arms delivering, even just purely financial profiteering on these financial instruments the better it is. And of course, the struggle for cancellation of the debt should be put in the context of international context for canceling debt of many developing countries which are crippled by the debt and cannot break the cycle of underdevelopment imposed by these debt instruments and mechanisms.
So Ilya, would you like to respond to those comments or questions? No? Okay, well, unless there are more questions coming in the chat, let me ask a follow-up question. You know, the last question was about the minerals deal. And one of the interesting things, and Tanya Vyhovsky has written 2 articles in Rolling Stone, first when the minerals deal first came up, and then right after the summit in Anchorage, Alaska. And she shows that it's more about oil, gas, and pipelines than about rare earth minerals. And then at the summit in Anchorage, Alaska, on the day of the summit, Putin issued a decree opening up Russia to Exxon and other Western energy companies again. And then we got reporting about a week later from the Wall Street Journal that Exxon, as soon as Trump was inaugurated, had started negotiating with Russia about going back. And one of the interesting things, I'm going to put the link in the chat I have and hope they'll get passed on to you. There was a statement issued in August 2022, early in the war, called Support Ukrainian Resistance and Disempower Fossil Capital. Ilia was one of the authors. It's about 15 leftists in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, and Germany. The husband of the woman that wrote that Black Lives Matter book in Ukraine, Zakhar Popovich, was one of the authors of that statement. And they warned at that time that there could be a convergence of Western and Russian imperialism that would overrule the need to defend Ukraine's sovereignty. And it seems to be coming to pass with this Putin-Trump alliance, where Putin wants to, conduct business deals. I mean, Trump is pushing business deals, and I think, and Trump thinks that will get him to a peace settlement, and I think Putin's playing him along because he wants Ukraine, not peace, and he wants the business deals too. So I throw that out there if you all would like to comment on it, because the main point is the minerals deal was a lot about oil, gas, and pipelines, not just rare earth minerals. And there's a lot at stake there. If this goes through, it's a carbon bomb on the climate, which should alert the climate movement.
I actually fully agree that this rare earth is absolutely overblown. The component of I yet to see credible surveying, material which will actually tell you that there is at the current market values, the rare earth deposits are actually have any commercial value, like are actually profitable to mine in Ukraine. Moreover, a spoiler alert, many of those are actually located close to Pokrovsk, which is currently being fought over. So I don't think anybody's going to invest billions of dollars in the mining infrastructure there anytime soon. So this was totally hijacked. This agenda, this agreement was, as one of Ukrainian bloggers put it very nicely, it's basically partially surrendering sovereignty to the United States, because any future exploration of any minerals, including gas and oil, are actually subject to notification to the United States government. So the U.S. government will have shall we use the medieval analogy, like the right of first night, I think would be very appropriate. And this is what's really happening. This is what's really like in that agreement. And of course, it's very sad to see that we are still talking about fossil fuels. In 2022, many of us believe that this Russian invasion would put Europe on more greener path, and would actually, of course, fossil fuels needed to sustain some kind of transition, but it's all this stuff is still being bought. Russian war machinery is being funded by European Union through whether direct or indirect purchase of gas and gas and oil and oil products actually, and it's a very sad that many environmental movements in Europe did not use this opportunity to actually to push for a greener agenda. It's very sad, and it's a lost opportunity. But I think we have to do it. I mean, the climate change, despite whatever politicians and Trump is saying, the climate change is real. It's not change; it's a catastrophe. It's real, and the further we wait, the worse consequences will be. So we should use this. We should definitely still use this hypocrisy of the oil and gas industry, their complicity and their funding, the direct funding of Russian war machinery. We should use this as way for green transition.
Yeah, I totally agree with Denise, and of course today's Trump speech in UN, which was largely devoted to hardcore version of climate change denial. So it's super depressing in a way when thinking about consequences for our planet with this state of mind, but I also want to maybe stress this differences between Trump's and Putin's understanding of relations between state and capital. Because for Trump, like politics is something secondary to the investments, to trade deals. So he even used the question of sanctions against Russia to make pressure on Europe to promote the interests of American oil and gas companies. So for Putin, this relation is totally opposite. So he doesn't believe in any investments that are not serving the political interests of one state or another. And he proved like many times that he is ready to sacrifice some of economic interests for political interests. So, for example, all Russian big corporations, and especially gas and oil corporations, they lost a lot of like billions of money because of invasion of Ukraine. They lost most of their European market, but Putin was ready for this. For all these losses, so he believed that that's the price to be paid, because the geopolitical like expansion is much more important, and oil and gas should serve as the tools of promotion of some political and geopolitical and military influence. And I think that is very important thing to take in account when talking about Exxon or any other American companies who are ready to return to Russia, because the only guarantee for their property in Russia will be the personal agreement, political agreement between Trump and Putin. If something will happen with this, good personal relations between these two beautiful people, they immediately will lose all their property, all their investments in Russia, like in a minute. And that's exactly what happened with most of Western companies in Russia when the war was started in 2022. So they lost all of their property without any legal ground, just because that was a question of political decision. And Putin deeply believes that core fundament of private property is the political decision of state authority to give this right of property or take it back.
The only piece I want to add is that, of course, this is about gas and oil. Isn't everything politically often about gas and oil? And one of the things that really struck me, and this is circling back to one of the earlier questions, and again, I recognize that the people that I was connecting with in Ukraine were largely leftists, although not entirely, was how many times this exact question came up and this exact desire, with the threats to gas and oil and with the energy crises that were existed, a year or 2 years ago in Ukraine, was how much people were looking at this as an opportunity to get off gas and oil, as an opportunity to invest more in clean energy, green energy. And I think those conversations were incredibly important. I mean, one, of course, it was because of the existential threat, but the reality of it is yes, Ukrainians are looking at an existential threat because bombs are falling from the sky every day, but every one of us are looking at the existential threat of climate change. Today it rained in Vermont for the first time in almost 2 months. Like, that is so abnormal. And we're all looking at that, whether we live in a place like Vermont where we think we're somewhat immune to that, or whether we're sitting in Germany where we have some wind bills and we should absolutely be looking at this as one of thousands of reasons to be moving away, not just from Russian gas, but from gas and oil, period.
Okay, well, we've run out of our time. I put 2 links in the chat. I have access. Hopefully they've been forwarded. One is to an organization in Ukraine campaigning for full fossil fuel sanctions on Russia and rebuilding Ukraine and Europe and the world around renewable energy. It's called Razom We Stand, means together we stand. And their leader, Svetlana Romanko, is in New York City right now, getting ready for that UN General Assembly meeting on climate tomorrow, trying to influence, people that got power to make decisions. So that's one thing to look at in regard to this discussion. And the other thing I put, hopefully it gets to you, is one of the articles by Antonia Juhas. It's called "Inside Putin's Fossil Fuel Victory Lap in Alaska," where she goes into, the extent to which this fossil capital is trying to get Trump and Putin together on giving us a climate bomb. So there's hopefully that information made it to you in the chat. So I want to thank the speakers, thank Haymarket Books for providing the technical support for this thing. I'd like to invite those of you who have been here with us to participate in the Ukraine Solidarity Network. You can join. I'll go to our website and you can find out how to join. We have bi-weekly membership meetings on Zoom. Usually spend the first hour having an educational presentation and discussion, and then take half an hour to get our committees working on our next steps. And that website again is www.ukrainesolidaritynetwork.us. And also on the homepage is a link, I want to remind you of this, to our fundraiser to get blood analyzers for the Independent Nurses Union and be like we are. This will go to Chernihiv Oblast, where they're getting bombed a lot, and blood analyzers are very useful for them to take care of their patients. So thank you for coming to this panel discussion, and we hope to see you in the future in our solidarity work.
Thank you.